January 17, 2001, dawned chilly in the city of Hutchinson, Kansas. A town of 40,000 located near the geographical center of the United States. Then, all hell broke loose. Two buildings in the heart of town were slammed by an explosion and burst into flames. The force of the explosion shattering glass a block away, and the flames sending smoke twisting over the city. One store manager will never forget that day.
The last thing I remember was like a rumble, like thunder, and I looked up and the ceiling tiles were all falling down. And the next thing I knew, I heard sirens. I was buried in it.
When we came back, we were still in shock. Couldn't believe that it had happened. Our building wasn't there. There was just a huge geyser of a fire, just, out of control.
As firefighters worked to douse flames that reached as high as 70 feet, city officials could only guess at what might have caused the explosion and fire.
We thought it was just a normal explosion due to, it was cold that day, that maybe some furnace malfunction and there was a leak in the gas.
But when officials turned off natural gas lines leading into downtown Hutchinson, the fires only seemed to burn higher and hotter.
So we knew that we had something else that we had no control of and couldn't find out what was wrong.
Into the evening, firefighters tried to quench the blaze that simply wouldn't go out. Then, as dusk fell, several miles east of downtown, 30-foot tall geysers of natural gas and salt water bubbled up out of the ground. It was a strange development, and it only added to the confusion. Because while it confirmed for authorities that there was a significant underground presence of natural gas, no one knew where such massive amounts of the gas were coming from, or where fire might strike next. Officials found out the next morning when another geyser bubbled up beneath the trailer park, found a spark, and exploded.
2 people were killed in that trailer explosion. And that led to an evacuation area of about a 2-mile area and a half-a-mile area of residential people. Then people began to panic. Schools were closed, mail was stopped into the area, and people wanted to know if things were under control. By that time, we had a declaration from the governor that we had a state of emergency.
Kansas Gas Service, also known as K-Gas, the local gas utility company, started to drill a series of 58 boreholes to try to vent the gas.
People in Hutchinson were afraid. They were scared to death. They had no idea where the next geyser was going to come up, if their house was going to blow up.
The boreholes were apparently effective in venting the gas pressure. After the trailer park explosion on January 18th, there were no other explosions or fires in Hutchinson. But with 2 deaths and a city gripped by fear, officials were anxious to somehow establish a pattern to the explosions, and their search took them back into Hutchinson's history. Beneath the city of Hutchinson lay a natural formation of salt, a 250-million-year-old mineral deposit from the Permian Age, called the Hutchinson Salt Member, that's more than 400 feet thick and stretches through Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, the largest salt deposit in the U.S. In the 1800s, businessmen started salt mines to extract the valuable mineral. And entrepreneurs made Hutchinson home to several European-style spas that featured mineral salt wells for their patrons.
We went back and actually woke up the museum director and went back in the history books of the city when it was founded to see where all these salt companies were located. And they were located in the southern part of the town, and that's where we were finding the wells. So we thought maybe there was some kind of resemblance.
Investigators suspected that the old salt wells were providing a pathway for the gas to get to the surface. But no one knew where the gas originated.
We were plotting the wells that were flaring up and to see if there was a pattern, if they would form some kind of a line to show us where the source was at. And it indicated to us it looked like there was a source maybe coming from the west of town.
Outside Hutchinson is the Yagi gas field, an underground storage facility.
The Yagi field is one of the hubs in the national gas storage and transportation system. There's fewer than 2 dozen of these hubs around the country, so they're very critical parts of the natural gas infrastructure. Gas comes in by pipeline, and then it's sent from here out on distribution lines all over the Midwest and connecting up with the national grid.
The Yagi storage field, which holds about 3.5 billion cubic feet of gas, was first developed in the late 1970s to store liquid propane at low pressure. At that time, engineers created about 70 long-necked gas storage holding areas, known as jugs. To create a jug, engineers drill about 600 feet down into the salt deposit and then use water to dissolve the salt and make a man-made cavern. Then the water is pumped out, leaving a stable storage place that can be sealed by cementing around the well casing.
These things are large enough to hold about 100,000 barrels of fluid, 42 gallons per barrel. That's 4.2 million gallons of fluid in one of these jugs in the salt.
Then, about a decade later, the company that made the jugs went out of business, and the local gas company converted the facility to hold natural gas at high pressure rather than liquid propane at lower pressure. The change was significant because higher pressure storage requires that the jugs are perfectly sealed in order to prevent leaks. Investigators believe that just before the explosions in Hutchinson, there was a pressure drop in the gas stored in a jug designated S1. This suggested the gas had exited the jug, but investigators still needed to know where it went and how it might have traveled the 8 miles to Hutchinson. To answer that question, geologists from the Kansas Geological Survey deployed what are known as seismic thumper trucks to create maps of underground conditions. A thumper truck works by literally thumping the ground to send shock waves into the earth. These are bounced back to the surface with varying degrees of intensity, depending upon the nature of the material they encounter below. This enabled scientists to make detailed maps of the nether regions between the city of Hutchinson and the Yagi Field facility.
Right here, it looks fairly flat. But underground, 600 feet, the rocks are dipping, and so they slowly incline towards the city of Hutchinson. Natural gas gets out into those rocks. It comes out of the well, comes out of the jug. It hits that rock layer, and it wants to find the highest place. It wants to rise to the top. So it found this rock layer and found a pathway and just headed straight that way for 8 miles right under downtown Hutchinson.
Scientists generated geophysical maps of the underground pathway to validate their theory about the gas. They came to believe that the gas leak started in the S1 jug. To confirm this, investigators photographed the inside of the jug. They discovered that the steel casing that ran down into the salt cavern was damaged, allowing the high-pressure natural gas to escape into the ground. Investigators claim that even though there was a pressure drop at Yagi Field, operators at the gas field either ignored it or didn't detect it, and kept topping off the jug, keeping the high pressure constant. While gas company engineers still seek other sources for the leak that ignited Hutchinson, most independent investigators agree that the Yagi Field is the most likely origin.
The field's inactive. Most of the gas has been distributed out in pipelines and sold to the market. There's about 20% of the gas left as a cushion at relatively low pressures to keep the system alive, to keep the caverns open, to keep the equipment running, while the company decides whether they want to apply to reopen it.
Following the Hutchinson disaster, state laws were passed requiring salt caverns to be built and maintained with higher safety standards.
There's also a concern that it happened once. We still don't know all of the things that went wrong, and there still may be other pathways for gas that we've never discovered. And so I think there's always going to be a reasonable doubt in many people's minds about living uphill from a facility this large with this high pressure gas.